Welcome to Yates Makes. This video is very much a follow-up to what I published a while back, looking at using chalk pastels as a transfer medium on gel plates. Now in this video we'll be looking at how cheap versus expensive pastels perform, and an interesting discovery there, and more importantly how you can combine chalk pastels with other transfer techniques to build up some interesting kind of textural combinations and contrasts in your work. Alright, let's get to it. Okay, let's start just by doing a quick comparison of cheap versus kind of mid-range, kind of pricey chalk pastels for transfer. So on the bottom there is some Faber-Castells that are kind of mid-range but quite pricey, and at the top are some real budget set from Hobbycraft, which is a craft store in the UK. Now all I'm doing is putting a few squiggles in a couple of similar colours from both sets, and yes, the colours are a little richer. It's definitely softer on the left with the more expensive or mid-range ones, but what you're going to see is they transfer in a fairly similar way. A bit of pressure on the back, no need, if you've not tried this before, for any kind of gel medium or paint to transfer. The tackiness of the plate simply grips onto that pastel dust. A quick technical point here, you'll notice I peeled the transfer paper up, put it straight back down in a different place to get that repetition, the repeat kind of motif, but you get a lovely faded version as more and more of that pastel gets used up. This could be employed for loads of different things. I've been using it for backgrounds and all sorts. Right, let's look at this kind of the main point I wanted to demonstrate. So what I'm planning to do now is lift or pull both these prints, and I'm using white acrylic here and trying to do it simultaneously using the same amount of paint, same pressure. But what you'll see is with the more expensive, softer pastels, that more of that kind of surface pastel bleeds into the colour that you're using to, or the gel medium that you're using to pull your print. Now that might not be a problem for some of you, but as you can see from the results on the left here, which is the more expensive pastels, there's a definite tint of the kind of orange and ochre colours that has bled into the white acrylic I've used to pull, and that is certainly fainter on the cheaper pastels. It's a small detail, but it could be important depending on what you're doing. Bear it in mind, save yourself some money, keep your prints cleaner if that's important to you. Okay, the main part of the video. I've been using stencils with the chalk pastels to really explore kind of texture and layers and building successive layers in print. So all I'm doing here is on a piece of construction or sugar paper, just putting a kind of blanket of pastel down there, and as you can see, this is a nice thick 300 GSM stencil I've made of one of my favourite motifs, which is a kind of percentage sign. So that thickness of the stencil is really important, because as you'll see when I start transferring some of that chalk pastel onto the surface of the plate through the stencil, I am not making full contact with the gel plate. My edges are getting really blurred purely because of the thickness of that stencil, and this you can really use to your advantage if you want a certain type of texture. So as you see when I pull the stencil up in a minute, I'm getting a kind of an impression or a kind of like a transfer of my design, but I'm getting a lovely blurred edge and a lovely softness. If I zoom in now, you'll see that that softness has transferred to varying degrees in different parts depending on the pressure, depending on the amount of pastel that was on the paper. So I'm going to pull this, and again you'll see some of that residual pastel bleed through the white that I'm using to pull the print, but again, you know, I think that could add a little bit of further atmosphere and kind of blur and softness, so you could use this to your advantage. You know, I'm inking up with my paint here and my roller as kind of gently and softly as I can. I don't want to disturb any of that chalk pastel, you know, any more than I need to. So paper goes down, a little pressure on the back, and wait a few minutes, and you'll find that your print pulls just fine. And you'll see, if I zoom in, give you a nice close-up, just how kind of soft and subtle some of those textures can look. It gives me the impression of kind of a stain rather than a kind of clean transfer, which I'm finding interesting to use in combination with other layers and other transfer techniques that have perhaps got kind of harder, or kind of, I think the word is grungier, that's used in the sort of gel community, purely by accident. But you'll see an example of that on the left, where there was some residual paint that's kind of cracked and peeled, that turquoisey colour, and you can see how good the two contrasting textures look together. Okay, let's look in a bit more detail at building layers. So I'm going to start with a slightly more complex drawing here. I'm just doing a quick cow's head skull and building up a few colours and a few squiggles as well. I'm trying to keep things really loose and expressive and kind of play to the strengths of the chalk pastels when you're drawing. So that again, flipped just like before, and pressure on the back. I'm using this, I found this paper that's great from, it's just like, I think it's called craft paper, but it's got a slightly glossy back and a side for drawing on, and I'm finding this so good for like transfers. It's just cheap as chips for chalk pastel stuff, really useful. So there is my first layer transferred onto the gel plate. Now, as long as I'm delicate and take it easy, I can add further stenciled layers. So again, with the stencil I just demonstrated with, I'm after a really soft kind of area, some more kind of motifs and design that are going to be transferred into the background behind my kind of cow's skull. So you can see there how it's just sitting on top of my drawing, which, if you think in reverse, when we pull the print, is going to sit underneath, if you know what I mean. So again, on with some paint, and give that a good covering, rolling out, working nice and quick. It was a hot day, so things were drying really fast. Paper goes on, again, plenty of pressure, give it a few minutes to dry, and you should find that your print pulls up relatively clean. Now, if I zoom in a little in a second, you'll see that even just using chalk pastels, but you approaching them in a different way, directly drawing and mark making, or by working through a stencil, I'm already getting a nice combination, or a textural combination in my work. Now, quick note, you might see some residual chalk on your plate. A quick bit of baby oil and a baby wipe will clean that up. You can see that pink smear was where I hadn't bothered, or rather didn't know to, on a previous print. You live and learn. Okay, we're going to now look at mixing some other transfer techniques to kind of increase that textural kind of contrast, and I'm going to start with a laser copy transfer. So all I've done is printed out a kind of half-tone dot pattern on a really large scale. I've loads of these lying around for little bits of background and adding some sort of poppy type textures. And if you've not seen or not tried laser copy transfer, I'll link a few videos up above. But you can see there I've transferred my pattern in pink, and using some gel medium because I want it to be transparent, because it's going to sit over a section of my drawing. Obviously, gel medium being transparent is a great way to transfer and preserve layers and keep parts of your image visible if you're working in this way. So a little pressure on the back, and you'll see when I pull the print now that pink has transferred quite nicely using the gel medium. The transparency of it has preserved all my layers underneath, but given me a nice graphic quality against all the expressive line work and softness of the stencil work. Okay, now I should have stopped there, but wanted to keep trying layers. This was an experiment. So what I did was trace off my print as it was, and mainly looking for the outlines and the details. And what I'm now doing is transferring that tracing to a piece of heavy paper. This is again 300 GSM paper, and what I'm intending to do is a kind of a biro emboss transfer to add a kind of very linear, kind of scratchy layer over the top of all these other textures. So if you've not tried biro emboss, again I'll link a video above now, but basically the principle is I'm pressing really hard with that biro, and therefore when I transfer, as you'll see me do now, inking up onto the plate with a mix of blues. When you put your biro emboss down onto the plate, you'll see that the embossed areas where you've pressed really hard don't make contact with the plate, don't disturb the paint, therefore leave the image you've kind of embossed and drawn as a kind of residue on the plate, if you like. I think I've explained that about as well as I can. So paper went down after I'd ink up a nice flat kind of surface, a bit of board or a book. I pressed too hard, I left it too long, didn't get the cleanest of prints here, but you know, with a bit of tidying up with a baby wipe or a bit of masking tape, I managed to get some of the splodges off, and you can see that most of my drawing kind of transferred, ready to add the gel medium to and flip over onto my print, and try and use the transparency of the plate to kind of register it over my kind of layers I've already built up. Now you see me having a bit of a nightmare with this. The plate I was using is a very floppy one. I didn't have a strong bit of perspex or anything on the back, so I'm fumbling around, and yeah, this one kind of failed a bit. I persevered with it anyway. As you'll see in a second, you know, most of my image transferred, and what didn't transfer didn't matter, because what I did was use it as a kind of guide to work with my pens and fill in some sort of gaps and add, you know, yet another layer of kind of line work and drawn detail. So Posca pens are what I'm using here, those paint markers, both white and a kind of turquoisey blue colour. And actually, as I filled in, you know, when you zoom in, as I will now and show you a few stills, actually the more layers you can get, you know, the more interest, I guess, in a way. Certainly those sort of stained layers next to some really scratchy, broken textures. For me, you know, this is a sort of like aesthetic that I like. So yeah, a really useful experiment. And you know, the best thing about these techniques are using chalk pastel transfers, using biro emboss, is that you can use them all over again. All I've done to do my second print is just top up that initial drawing, transferred it again. Here I'm just tracing off a further drawing. It's very hard for you to see, but I can just see a very faint image of my print through that thin craft paper. So I'm just doing a second chalk drawing over the top there. And you know, these chalk pastels, these biro embosses, you can just keep reusing them and get a series of prints going, which is the massive benefit of bothering to use them in the first place with the gel plate, as well as being able to build layers, which is obviously a lot easier to do when you're transferring and sealing things with paint. Okay, next little thing I tried here is, you know, if you've been watching the channel for a while, that I love text in art. So I've made myself, again on that thick 300 GSM paper, a text stencil here. And the idea is I want a kind of sort of a blurred, kind of glowing, very faint trace of some text running through the back of my image. So, you know, be mindful to flip over any text because it's going to print in reverse otherwise. So I've got it in reverse on my gel plate here, and I'm using that same technique again of just dusting through a little bit of chalk pastel from a piece of paper, and using that thick stencil is going to give me, along with a nice light pressure, a very faint image. So using my kind of more stable, sturdy gel plate here, I'm again using gel medium because I want that transparency in this transfer, and inking up with my gel medium, and I'm going to flip this over and try and register it over the top of my kind of second print that I've been doing. So again, laying it down, fairly easy to line up, and you'll see that once that had dried after a few minutes, I've now got my kind of second layers, if you like, working through this print, and a lovely kind of glowing text that I'm going to build now further layers and kind of bring that skull back to the foreground. So again, using my Biro Emboss that I'd already used for that kind of bit of a mishap. This time I'm going for a much heavier colour, so I'm going straight in with the black. Nice thin even layer. Important, if you want to try and get it clean as possible, you get that kind of spread as evenly as possible. On goes my Biro Emboss, just using my fingers this time, not using the board, and hoping to get a slightly cleaner print. Gentle pressure, should only need it down for about 20-30 seconds at the most. The fact this one has been used already means the paper is sealed with paint in places, so you might need to leave it a little longer. Obviously paint is more absorbent than a kind of sealed surface, but there you go. Yes, it needs some cleaning up again, but the drawing has transferred, and that's what I was after. So again, gel medium, because as you guess, I want that transparency, and registering it over the top of my first layers, just fiddling around again, trying to get it lined up and placing it down, leaving it a few minutes, a bit of pressure on the back, flipping this one over so I can put a bit of pressure with the brayer on with on the back of that paper, and peeling up. Again, felt like it needed more, so back in with my pens and adding a bit more colour, line work, just trying to get a few more layers in there, a bit more clarity in the original sort of like skull design, if you like, and just playing. This is the best thing about a gel plate, is it encourages experimentation. Someone commented on the channel recently that gel plates are a kind of great alternative when you can't afford loads of expensive printmaking equipment, but I'm fast thinking that actually they offer something that a lot of other printmaking techniques just don't offer, and I guess that's what I'm trying to demonstrate here. This ability to use mixed media, really explore and experiment, and the added benefit is they don't come saddled with hundreds of years of weight of tradition like lithography or etching or whatever. You can just start from scratch and explore it and push it your own way for your own style and your own ends. Once you get your head around a few techniques, a few different ways of making transfers, and as I'm zooming in here, really enjoy the variety of ways in which you can get an image pulled off of one of these things, then I reckon there's years of joy to be had. Okay, well, in case you're wondering where all of this experimentation kind of led to, I kind of increased the scale, worked on a canvas board, so I had a kind of harder surface, and did a load of the sort of collage and ripping back and sanding techniques. The sun's out, the weather's good, so that means I can be in the garden with my sander again. And for a load of my layers running through the piece, I use this technique that I've already demonstrated, that I'm re-demonstrating here, in using kind of my stencils and my chalk pastels to transfer little kind of motifs and details. And you'll see there the piece that I'm working on, which again is this cow head, but I've used the corrugated cardboard technique that I recently discovered. I put a video out a while back that I'll link above now, to transfer the image of my cow's head, and then loads and loads of layers of chalk pastel transfer, collage, paint, again some laser copy transfer, and then this was my last little touch with some chalk pastel kind of poppy style dots just running through the background of my image. And again, just subtle little layers that that I love to work with and build up and sand back and add more to and erase, or reveal through kind of ripping back or sanding. There you go. Hope you enjoyed the video, covering techniques that really appeal to me. Hopefully they do to you too. Hopefully you can find ways to adapt them into your work. Now, as well as making more videos for YouTube to help you with your kind of experimentation with drawing, with printmaking, and mixed media work, I've also got myself onto Instagram. So here's my handle or tag or Instagram name. Look me up, be patient with me. I'm only just getting my head around it, but I'm hoping to post photos, short reels and things as well, so you can keep up with what I'm doing. Finally got myself a space in our house as well, so I'm going to be setting up a kind of studio in half of that room. I'll probably post on there rather than bore you to tears with a long video about that. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. I look forward to seeing you soon in another video. Take it easy. Ta-ta.